Hello and welcome back. The digital has entered our lives completely, even more during the pandemic. But how can we really connect as museum professionals and engage with our audiences without leaving anyone behind? And where should museum professionals really focus right now? The digital or the physical, or this line in between? In order to explore this matter, we begin with a panel discussion, and I want to call upon its moderator, Prodromos Tsiavos, Head of Digital and Innovation at the Onassis Foundation, to introduce his distinguished guests. Prodromos, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. It's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce the Digital Transformation Panel. And we have quite a few interesting things to discuss in a perversely interesting time as the one we are experiencing now. So I have the great pleasure to have with me four distinguished guests. Meriç Öner, Director of Research and Programs at SALT, in Istanbul. Labat Maïté, and Maria Zambetti, Social Media Manager at Momus in Thessaloniki. The topic that we're going to address today is the question of digital transformation. And the COVID-19 pandemic has not only accelerated the digital transformation of cultural institutions, but has brought forward broader questions regarding what is the role, what is the nature of cultural institutions, how they relate to different types of organizations or the government or the private sector. And most importantly, how does its staff and the audience interact in this condition? While this is a transformation that has been swift, it has also been a transformation, and it is a transformation that is forced. And while we talk a lot about technology and data and big data and artificial intelligence, we always have to go back to the humans that actually produce the content and produce the data, which then are being gathered by our machines. So our key theme becomes what does the phrase digital transformation mean, both to us, both as individuals and as institutions. In other words, how are we experiencing this enforced and accelerated digital transformation as cultural workers, as parts of different institutions, as citizens, and as persons? So after this very short introduction, and without further ado, I will pose the first question to all the speakers, and I will start with Meriç. And the question is, how have you experienced the digital transformation in your work? What did it mean to you? Meriç.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. As well put, we have been in a position where we had to act swiftly, definitely, to what's happening under the new restrictions and under the new directions that I could say coming both from the virus and also our greater administrations, the governance, and all our all different bodies. But I would say my perception of the digital has not changed according to the restrictions today. That I always thought it as more as a medium than a tool that could be used in translation of other media in our lives, which means that the digital, which came almost as an offering during the period, I guess that's comprehensively being experienced in different countries as lockdown. So digital is a tool, but at the same time, it definitely is a medium. And we thought at SALT accordingly how to best perform, which means that what it means to have digital as a medium for most of our programming and our research, because we act in two spheres, and within that, the digital provides, especially for research, wider accessibility. And this we had been using within SALT, especially with the particular project that's an ongoing project of the archives, which in a very brief explanation, the archives at SALT are civilian archives, I would say. They deal with city, economy, society, architecture and design, and also art from mid-19th century to late 20th century. But the most important property of these archives is the quality is that they're all digitized and they're all available, they're all accessible under Creative Commons, which means that the research we do are interpretable by other researchers because they're open online and in use free of charge. They are then put to use by other researchers, academics, or you can just be an enthusiast, or they can be part of other programs, other projects, other institutions uses, which I think can be guaranteed to go further when they happen in this digital media, in the sense that having physical access to an archive is different than having the access to an archive that is digital, which is so much easy, so much fast in a sense to go through everything that's there. And the second capacity, I think, of the digital is that it allows you to, in a sense, to be more comprehensive, both in your own activities, but also in making different types of engagements. And so the second use we want to put our, I would say, our foot in was making many different disciplines and people come together no matter what, because this is part of our programming that allows us to speak to invite and produce together with people from different backgrounds. So this time we put it to use in a very particular project that's called study groups. And these study groups were formed by our, I would say, friends who participated in other projects before with SALT, and we were asking their opinions on how to move forward in this particular circumstances. And from that, we realized we can become an agent in putting together maybe the artists who are working on particular projects with people who could be of use or of service. So this started a process of series of individual actually workshops that enable, again, people to come together, this time in the digital environment. So these are the two examples I think I would put forward to enforce how we try to shift this forced transformation into something that has hopefully positive impact.
Thank you very much, Meriç. So I gathered two items from what you've just said, medium and a tool, and also something which is an opportunity for innovation in terms of things that already exist there, but you somehow put them back into the surface. So I will take your account and move to Maïté and ask her pretty much the same question with a different spin. I assume you're the queen of Louvre at this time, right? So everyone comes and begs you to do things like a magician. What has been the digital transformation for Louvre? Was it really a transformation, and what has it been for you?
Thank you, Pro, and thank you for the invitation. I would join Meriç on her speech. The Louvre was already digitally transformed before the crisis, I would say. It's been like 15 years now that the digital arrived at the Louvre, like in other museums. So, but nevertheless, when the COVID crisis started this year, and when we closed the museum mid-March in France, when the lockdown, the first lockdown started, it was a shock. It was a shock before the Louvre has never been closed like this from the Second World War. So first shock. And second, digital shock. It was like for 1 month before, we were observing online Italians coming to the Louvre website, and then Spanish coming to the Louvre website. So we had on our data a worldwide situation of the COVID crisis, and I was quite shocked because we did not, with my team, expect that the data of the Louvre website would give an idea of the global situation. We could observe, we could say from the Louvre data which country, was entering a lockdown. And this was a huge shock for me because I never expect that. And then we behave like a media. So I would say medium tool and media, because the first weeks of the lockdown, we just behave ourselves like a media, delivering every week new content or archives or content from the archives. And we gather like 10 million of visits in 2 months, and it was the third shock, apart from being locked down in my home, the third shock, that gathering 10 million of visits. And it was, normally we have 14 million in 1 year. In 2019, we collect 14 million of visits on the website, and during the crisis we collect 10 million visits in 2 months. And now we try to learn from these different states and what next, and we develop many online content, because we believe that we have an audience for that outside of COVID crisis, and we try to think the coming website of the Louvre as a platform, because I think that the COVID crisis showed us that Netflix or Amazon Prime was not enough for people, that they need culture and they need to access culture, even if when the museum is closed. Those numbers show that, I think.
So I'm tempted. I cannot leave it like that. So you started working for a museum and you ended up working for a TV channel.
More or less.
More or less. So I'll take that this very provocative line, and I think this is, I totally agree with you. This is a feeling we all have in the cultural sector. Things used to go a bit slower, but they have accelerated. And I'll pass the floor now to Maria. And Maria, you are heading the you're a social media manager, and you're supposed to be one of the fast ones. So you have to react and act fast and make not necessarily content, but at least make leads available for content for people to see. What has the pandemic experience been for you and for your institution and institutions behind Momus? And if you could tell us a few things about what Momus is.
Yes, of course. First of all, I would like to thank you in behalf of Momus for the invitation and share with you my excitement for being here. I have to admit that at Momus, COVID-19 found us in the process of reconsidering our digital presence, but not ready yet to go out there fully armed. The reason behind that is that the Metropolitan Organization of Museums of Visual Arts of Thessaloniki, because that is Momus, what Momus stands for, is a recently established organization consisting of 5 different already existing museums. Museum of Modern Art, Kostakis Collection, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Thessaloniki Museum of Photography, the Experimental Center for the Arts, and the Museum Alex Milonan. So our digital footprint was already a little confusing for the audience. Nevertheless, having to suspend the operation of all of Momus venues last March and turn exclusively to our digital channels was a challenge we had to address very quickly to the best of our ability. So the first thing we could think of was our social media, which is our most powerful and instant digital channel. And wanting to state that we were still socially active through the lockdown, we ran a campaign titled Momus Resilience Project, recommending selected works from our collections and exhibitions depicting aspects of home as artists have perceived it to be, because we wanted to be closer to the people who worked, who created, who expressed themselves through their homes. After that, we felt we had to include the audience in our content production, so we went bigger and announced an open call titled So Far So Close, calling everyone to share with us an image created by them that had some artistic qualities in response to the conditions of confinement that we experienced at the time, in order to make the digital album of those days. That project created the need of building an online platform from scratch. And that was a platform which later became the website of all our digital projects. We already had a website, but we now have a second, a smaller one for the digital projects. At the same time, we also organized the online conversations with the audience called Together We Look. And we all learned all the stuff, learned how to use Google Meet, Zoom platform. So during the second lockdown, we were more prepared, more experienced, and more informed for an efficient digital performance. I don't know if that kind of turn towards a more digital-oriented content could be called a digital transformation, because the term transformation requires thorough research, it requires data analysis, a huge budget, groundbreaking changes that no one had the time to do when the pandemic hit us. But sure, cultural institutions experienced remarkable acceleration in the digital environment, and I think that will help to reach the digital transformation faster.
Thank you, Maria. And I think what the concept of transformation is highly contested. I agree with you. But I think we will return to that inevitably. That's the title of our panel anyway. But this gives me the opportunity, both what you said and what Maïté was saying before also, and Meriç, in terms of what is in the backbone, what is the thing that actually we already had there. And we discovered in the during the lockdown, and I'll pass the floor to Zoe, who's a systems person, and she could tell us more about the backbone. So what's the digital backbone that makes us stand even at times of pandemics? Zoe.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers committee. Concerning the steps towards digital transformation in our museum, the first computer has been installed in 1990. And 1 year after, the Information Technological Department has been established. This is the department I belong to. So the past has been full of experiences, but what happened in 2020 has been new to all aspects of the lives of the museum, our visitors, and ourselves as workers and individually. Firstly, I would like to talk neither about the beautiful nor the creative side of our work, because there is, but about the less spectacular and absolutely necessary infrastructure projects that still help us continue to be in contact with our audience and go on with our everyday jobs. So very abruptly, we started working mainly from home. My colleagues had to obtain more technological skills as they had to use webmail, video conferencing platforms, and VPN connections. Luckily enough, these services have been available to the museum since 2015, but they had never been used in such extent. We started facing problems with internet connectivity and are still coping with this situation, since our main services are located in the center of Athens, where internet congestion is an everyday struggle. So we could work faster from home on internet applications, but very slowly on files saved on our servers. Since the museum activities had been suspended, we started coming up with new ways to stay close to our audience too. We valued that we could provide some useful and interesting distraction at least, let alone become a museum from home. In the previous years, we had gathered a good amount of digital content in the forms of digital documentation and images of our collections and archives, thematic videos that present the story of Greek civilization from antiquity to early years through our museum collections, videos that showcase past museum activities, videos from previously held conferences, educational activities, virtual tours in permanent exhibitions, even some voice recordings of old fairy tale books that belong to our toy collection. Some of them have been 20 years old, but are still interesting. And being a member of the IT department and worked actively on developing most of the above digital content has been a great satisfaction those days. We all started creating new digital content by hosting new online activities such as educational programs, exhibition tours, online lectures, and the close-ups video series that highlight fascinating stories behind objects at the museum. Also, short videocasts from the museum personnel. Most of the old digital content has already been hosted on our website, but a little bit scattered and hidden through menus. We gathered all the new content in a special webpage named Museum from Home and sent in thematic clusters in a weekly newsletter and through everyday social media posts. Also, statistics showed that people found them interesting, so we are planning on developing ways of showing them off in more ways. In the meantime, we had been developing our new project, the online ticketing system, which was ready to use just when the first lockdown started. But then we had to wait for the reopening in June. All the above show the situation in the museum. But although it may sound interesting and nice because we could work some things, and although I'm a computer engineer and I should have been happy about all this work, I do not like this lack of physical interaction. And I hope that very soon and in a good way, we are going to be together again.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And I'll take your last lead about speaking about wishing to come again together in physical terms. And I'll go back to Meriç, and I'll use one of my favorite phrases that Bruno Latour uses in one of his books when he says there is no transportation without transformation. And so we've made this almost rite of passage from the physical world to the digital world. We had a slight moment when we went out to the physical world again, and then we are now somewhere in between. So what does that mean for an organization like SALT, and you personally being an architect, having a design background, dealing with materials? How is this transition from materiality to immateriality influence both the organization and the person?
Well, it's a tough question. It's not something that can be answered in a couple of minutes, I think, in a sense, but I will try. First of all, there has maybe one thing to enjoy, in a sense, is that there is an attachment, I think, maybe more an emotional attachment to physical spaces. And as definitely coming from that background, it involves me as well. But that attachment is also to some of the formats we keep repeating, and maybe we, in the end, invest much more heavily because the rhythm is of the rhythm that we memorize in our spaces in cultural institutions, like the exhibitions, for instance. So there, I think, was already a moment where we were all supposed to question some of the habits, because the habits can become maybe unhealthy for the reasons that it's harder to sustain other more valuable, more useful, more shareable projects than to invest in objects, invest in physical spaces. And SALT was actually, when it was established, it kind of defined itself with having digital as one of its main directions, not as a space that would, more as a space than something that is more attractive, but as the space that it can hold more than to a physical space. And it can take care of the digital, but then instead of taking care of physical objects and caring for them is a different kind of act, definitely. And so having these calculations in mind, it had decided to hold archive collections, digital archive collections, and not physical collections, for instance. So this is a step that was taken 15 years ago. SALT's been open for 10 years. I guess these steps were needed for many of the institutions. I don't know whether this is a transformation for an existing institution, should be decided like that, or this is at least a way of not copying the models that have come before us. And so when this moment arrives, when we are forced, as you first said, to use our abilities instead of our facilities, I think it's an interesting moment that we can again rethink of the habits, at least I would say, of the cultural professionals, because what we kept trying to sustain is something we obtained from the 20th century. And it always felt like, as I told you, I guess before, it felt like the 21st century arrived at last. It was not because it was digital, but because it can allow us to cut back on some of the unnecessary things I think we got used to doing as this almost a show of wealth, in a sense, where it would be great to be together, but we don't actually have to travel all the time to make these meetings work, to gather and discuss and to have exchange views. So things like that. I guess everyone has many examples of their own, but this is how I take it. So the space is needed, physical space is needed for certain formats and projects and programs and activities, where the digital is needed for others. And at this moment, it feels like digital provides longer lives if we tend to them, and it provides greater accessibility if we care for that, and it provides, therefore it provides more users to others than the institution. And I always like this way of shifting, making the institution an agency, an agent, not the owner. And that's, digital is much more equipped for that, I think, than the space, the dominance of space, physical space.
Thank you very much. That was actually, you did quite well for the difficult question. I'm happy, but I'll keep one thing: use your abilities, not your facilities. Fantastic line for us to remember. And okay, the 21st century is here. 2020, we understood that. Stop it. We understood the 21st century is here. And since 2020 was quite vocal about it, indeed, I'll go back to Maria and ask her, all right, 2020 is right. We are in the 21st century. What's going to be left behind after the pandemic or the lockdowns are over? Fingers crossed. What do you think is going to endure? What are the things you think that we're going to leave behind with the pandemic, hopefully? Maria.
Although we were all unprepared during the first lockdown, we all experienced, I'm sure you observed that as well, a tremendous increase in the number of visitors on our website and our social media channels. It was about 80% higher than before. Accordingly, when we reopened on last June, that number dropped down rapidly. People had already experienced extreme digital fatigue and had the need, I think, to push aside anything that had a screen involved. To the contrary, during the second lockdown, we did not observe that roller coaster of visitors in our digital channels, showing that the audience learned to handle the excessive information and the huge amount of content that's receiving, evaluated that content, and came back for only the one they liked the most. I would not exclusively associate the further integration of digital environments or social media in the strategy of the institutions with pandemic, because I think that this affiliation should have taken place much earlier, independently of COVID-19. It was just the pandemic that made this need so much more visible, as it caught us all unprepared. I believe that after this experience, organizations will give the required attention to their digital content, and they will integrate it into their strategy much more actively. The trap they can fall into, however, is a simple transfer of physical space to a digital environment. Organizations should listen to and understand the identity of each social media and build the appropriate strategy for each platform, adapting their content and making it interesting for each environment separately. I think that the turn to the digital environment is here to stay. It was here long before the pandemic. I think that cultural institutions just hadn't realized that. You said before that things were a bit slow in the cultural sector, but now they have to keep up. They have to accelerate all the actions and follow the speed of the technology.
Thank you, Maria. And I mean, we need to follow the speed of technology, and technology needs to be facilitating what we really do and what we actually do. I'll slightly deviate from what we're discussing to go to something a bit more technical. And speaking of presence and absence, which I think is something which we experience a lot, but in a very technical sense. So I go to Zoe and ask her, how do you think? How long do you think we're going to stick with our servers? And to what extent are we going to all move to clouds? I mean, speaking about presence and absence, but in a less poetic fashion. So there are clouds there. Do you think we are going to be eventually migrating all our assets as museums to the clouds? Are we going to keep any servers back home, or to have them there and touch them and feel safe that our assets are in the basements of our cultural institutions? Or are we all going to give it to the Microsofts and the Amazons of these worlds?
Actually, I can speak only for the for the short time future. I don't know really. We have also been considering turning to cloud for some time now, even before the pandemic. We use it already for our website. We use the social media platforms. We have started using it to an extent for our office applications. But I'm going to refer again to slow internet. I think it's a Greek custom, and huge files that we keep for referencing our image archives. And this is a problem to use the cloud exclusively for the time being, let's say. And concerning any considerations about threats, for the time being, I don't think we address any of this situation, because we provide only low resolution files online, so we don't have a problem still.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And so I'll go as we're drawing to a close of the session. I'll go back to Maïté, and I'll ask you a question, but I'll have to share my screen to do that, which I cannot help but doing. And speaking about presence and absence, I have this one here. I don't know if you can see my screen. Is the Beyoncé question. I couldn't help it, you know. You're in the Louvre, we talk about digital. I mean, come on, I couldn't help it. And what I'm surprised here is that I can see the Victory, I can see Madonna, I can see even the Christ himself, right? I don't see Jay-Z. I don't see Musée, you know? And what I find so exciting about this one is that there is always this presence and absence game with digital, and sometimes it's more symbolic than it is actual. So you have done this virtual tour, which is a virtual tour about Beyonce and Jay-Z, and they don't appear anywhere. It's just the artworks, which is the substance of what you do, I hope, still in the Louvre. So what do you have to say about this experience, which came up far before the pandemic? How does that have informed who you are as a museum, and what does it mean for the future?
About Jay-Z and Beyonce, first of all, I have to say that I do not have the personal phone number of Beyonce and Jay-Z, and and that it was an operation led by the communication at the Louvre, another department, because it was really about welcoming Beyoncé and Jay-Z for their own clip. So Louvre was like a beautiful, I would say, a place for them to express their artistic views. You showed the Louvre website. Actually, in what you showed, it's a way to do the trail in the museum. So it's not a virtual tour, it's really a tool to, at the beginning of the session, we were speaking of digital as a tool. It's a tool for people that can download the trail and then go to the museum and do the exact trail that Beyoncé and Jay-Z offer in the video clip. And it's really important that the Louvre website and social media is also a way to access the Louvre, because my personal obsession, even before the pandemic, and I really joined Maria on that, it's like we don't have to put too many screens between our institutions and between masterpieces and audiences. And even if I work in digital, it's my obsession. Maybe it's a paradox, but we know that when we do a lot of digital in our day, we need fresh air and we need a beauty of landscape, of beauty of art after a long visual day or something like that. So I would say that we have to find this difficult balance between digital, between absence and presence, between digital and being physically in the museum, and digital has to serve digital content, but also the way for people to come see the art in physically, I would say, in presence.
Thank you so much, Maïté. I think this was a really material answer to my question, very substantial one. And I think what is important that all of you have highlighted is the fact that we need to understand the new media, the new media, as they are called, in the sense of we don't just replicate the physical space, but we always return to the physical space, or at least we hope. And I think the example of Jay-Z and Beyoncé precisely talk about that. But it's basically about what you can see in the physical space. So before I close, I will ask a difficult question to all of you. It comes a bit of a surprise. We haven't discussed about this. I will ask you this thing, everyone. If you were to take one thing from your institution, one material thing, and live with it. Let's say there are no legal repercussions, okay? And you could take one thing from your institution. It doesn't need to be an artwork. I mean, of course, since there are no legal repercussions, you could do that. But if you were to take one thing from your office, from your institution, and save it, what would that be? And I'll give you 5 seconds. Meriç, you're on.
Well, it would be extremely physical. I wouldn't be able to take the building itself, but the building we use, some part of it, some marble, something from it. That's this late 19th century building. I do identify with it as personally also, not just as the institution.
Thank you very much, and that suits you. I think that fits perfectly well. Maria.
You got me on surprise. I don't know, but I have to do it. I'm so sorry. I have to do it. But we have the head of Alexander the Great by Andy Warhol in the Museum of Contemporary Art. I have to have that piece of artwork on my wall.
Okay, excellent. Zoe, what would you take from Benaki? You have a lot of things.
But I thought you told us not to take an artwork.
It could be an artwork. There are no legal repercussions. Okay, it's a thought experiment.
I take a catalog because I'm going to have time to study it better than the time I have now.
Okay. a modest one. I would take the servers if I were you. I would take them all. The whole thing. And Maïté, what would you take from the Louvre?
It would be the wedding at Cana from Veronese, because it's the first masterpiece I can remember as a kid, and because it's bigger than my flat.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really enjoyed it. I think it was obvious. I hope our audience enjoyed it as well. And I hope that we can all see each other in the future at a real place. If you take something from your institution, just don't tell. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It was great to meet you.
Thank you very much, Prodromos, and thank you everybody in the panel for this wonderful discussion, showing the power and the limits of the digital.